experience. When she kind of comes back, she believes that she is no longer home, that her home is somewhere else. She starts having dreams about this place. She describes this garden and this big building, and then eventually she discovers that what she's describing is a place in ancient Egypt. And she ends up becoming obsessed with ancient Egypt, and then begins providing information and helping with archaeological digs that leads to numerous incredible discoveries, all from memories that she claims to have had from her previous life. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation and this whole story seems like totally made up, just listen to how the story flows and then try to make sense of how in the world she had the information she had that led to distinct discoveries that nobody else had made, that they found this stuff as a result of Dorothy Eady's information. How do we reconcile that? It's not impossible, but no one's been able to do it yet, so let's see what you think. Dorothy Eady was born into a lower middle-class family in London in 1904. She was an only child, and she was absolutely adored by her parents. Now, unfortunately, when she was 3 years old, she fell down a flight of stairs in her home and was unconscious. They called the doctor, and the doctor shows up and says she's actually dead. As the parents are talking to the doctor, after about an hour, Dorothy gets up and goes into her bedroom and is like playing on her bed. And the parents come in with the doctor and they can't make any sense of it. And in fact, the parents were furious at the doctor for pronouncing her dead, because they're like, obviously she wasn't. If she's just fine now, like, who are you? What kind of doctor are you?
I'm sure.
The doctor swears she was dead. Shortly after the accident, Dorothy develops a strange accent that they can't quite place, and doctors and specialists believe that she's suffering from something called foreign accent syndrome, which is fairly common amongst people with significant head injuries. Basically, it alters your speech, and to people that don't know any better, they might think that you just have a strange foreign accent. Dorothy also started telling her parents about this recurring dream she had, where she'd be near this huge building with these big pillars, and she'd be in this beautiful garden. She loved this garden. She talked about the beautiful flowers and her friends that were there, and it was just this unbelievable place. It was like this oasis next to this building. But she didn't know where it was, and she's 3-4 years old, so she's not able to articulate much what this is, but she was just in love with this garden and this location in her dreams, and she talked about it endlessly. Dorothy's mother would find her daughter on her bed either before she went to sleep or when she woke up, crying, because Dorothy longed to actually be in this place in her dreams, which she started calling home. Now, Dorothy's mother would say, but Dorothy, you're home now. And she would say, no, I'm not. I'm not home. My home is in that garden. It's near that building. And no matter how Dorothy's mother tried to kind of convince her that, no, honey, you live here now. You live here. You've never lived anywhere else. Dorothy was unbelievably convinced that what she was seeing in her dreams was her actual home. It was around this time that Dorothy's parents brought Dorothy to a British museum where they had a big ancient Egyptian exhibit set up. And when they went into the museum, Dorothy sees this exhibit and she's immediately attracted to it. And as she gets closer, she starts seeing the statues of the pharaohs and pictures of the pyramids, and she sprints into the exhibit, runs away from her parents, and she's running to the different statues of the pharaohs and of the Sphinx and all of these different icons from ancient Egypt, and she's kissing their feet, she's sobbing hysterically, and she's yelling, I'm home, I'm with my people. This little tiny kid is having this revelation that she's found home, and she refused to leave the museum. Finally, her parents, get her to calm down. They're pretty embarrassed as people are like looking at them like, what's going on with your child? She finally leaves with her parents, but at this point, now Dorothy has attached that place in her dreams that she longs to go with the beautiful garden. She's attached it to Egypt, ancient Egypt. And so she becomes completely obsessed with ancient Egypt. Her obsession with ancient Egypt started to get her in trouble. When she'd go to Sunday school, her family is a very, very devout Catholic family. She would compare Catholicism to other ancient Egyptian religions. That got her in a lot of trouble, and in fact they said, you can't come to Sunday school anymore. Then she got expelled from her Catholic school because she refused to sing a number of the hymns that in some way disparaged Egyptians, ancient Egyptians. She was also told that she could no longer attend Sunday Mass for the same reason. She was basically not welcome anymore. At 6 years old, Dorothy, who knew how to write and read in English, started to take a keen interest in hieroglyphics, the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and she said that they were definitely familiar to her, but she had forgotten how to read it. When she was 7, she was looking through a textbook and she saw a picture of the Temple of Seti I, which is in Abydos, Egypt. And as soon as she saw the picture, this big picture of the temple, and then next to it kind of like the broken remains of what looks like maybe a garden of some kind. And she immediately said, "That is my home. That's where I'm from. Right there. Temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt. That's my home." And as she's looking at the picture and she's looking at those kind of tattered, broken remains, this is thousands of years old, she's looking at the area next to this big temple in the picture. And she's like, "That's the garden, but where are the trees? Where is everything? Why does it look like this?" Like, she didn't understand that was thousands of years ago that it was a garden. But she saw the picture and immediately knew it as her home. Also in the textbook was the picture of the pharaoh, Seti I, who the temple was named after. And when she saw the picture of the very well-preserved mummy, she was overcome because she claimed to have known him personally. At age 10, Edie was kind of discovered by world-renowned Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge, who offered to teach her how to read and write hieroglyphics, which she picked up almost instantly. Starting at 14, in addition to that recurring dream of the Temple of Seti and the garden right next to the Temple of Seti that she claimed was her home, she started having a recurring nightmare where she, in her former life, was in this subterranean enclosure and she was being questioned by a high priestess who was demanding that she answered her questions, and when she refused, she was beaten. At 27 years old, Edie meets an Egyptian man and falls in love with him, but also, I'm sure on some level, she's marrying him to secure Egyptian residency, because as soon as they got married, they moved right back to Egypt, where she could be a resident. And actually, when they landed in Egypt, the first thing she did, she's overcome with emotion when she lands, and she starts kissing the ground and crying and saying, "I'm home, I'm home." Dorothy and her Egyptian husband have a son, and they named him Seti, just like the pharaoh Seti. Once Edie moved to Egypt, she started, by her account, getting visits from an entity known as Hor-Ra. Now, Hor-Ra, she claimed, was the spirit of the pharaoh Seti I. She would get into these almost trance-like states at night over that first year she was in Egypt. It was like she'd be sleeping, then she would get up and be in trance, and she would start frantically writing hieroglyphics in the middle of the night. And her husband would wake up and he would see her doing this, and she was like, he couldn't stop her, he couldn't communicate with her. She was just in a trance, recording what she was claiming Hor-Ra was telling her, was dictating to her that she needed to write down. And it was in fact about who she used to be. She used to be, according to Hor-Ra, a woman by the name of Ben-Trishit, who lived 3,000 years earlier in the time of Pharaoh Seti I, and who lived in the Temple of Seti in and around that garden. So after a year of her going into these trances and writing in hieroglyphics, she had over 70 pages of transcript of what she claims was her story, and it goes like this. Before being born as Dorothy Edie, she was an Egyptian woman named Ben-Trishit. Her father was a soldier, and her mother was a vegetable seller who actually died when she was just 3 years old. Unable to care for her, Ben-Trishit's father placed her in the temple of Tom el-Sultan. She was then raised at the temple where she later became a priestess. When she was 12 years old, Ben-Trishit was given two choices: either venture out into the world on her own or become a consecrated virgin and stay at the temple. Ben-Trishit decided to take the vows. But a few years later, she meets Pharaoh Seti I, and they end up falling in love, and soon she becomes pregnant. When she is discovered to be pregnant, she was interrogated by the high priest and beaten when she refused to answer, a scene that corresponded to her childhood nightmare. Unwilling to put her beloved Seti through a public scandal, Ben Trishit took her own life. Edie's husband grew increasingly disturbed watching his wife go into these trances and write out the hieroglyphics. I mean, she's amassing all these pages of hieroglyphics. Her whole thing was just too much for him, and so he ultimately filed for divorce in 1936. Following the divorce, Dorothy and her young son leave and go live in another town near the Giza pyramids, and she starts going by the name Seti, which means mother of Seti. So she doesn't go by Dorothy anymore. And at this point, she also takes a job with Egypt's Department of Antiquities, and she begins a very lengthy and highly successful career in Egyptology. For nearly 20 years, Seti would research almost exclusively the temple of Seti I and learn everything about not only the temple but the people who lived there, because it was where she believed she used to live. But it wouldn't be until 1952, and almost in her 50s, that she finally actually steps foot in Abydos. It was because of a job transfer that took her there. And in fact, she took a pay cut to get this job. She was so desperate to just finally step foot in the place that she believed was her own home. As soon as she walked into the temple, the first thing she says is, "It's as if I've lived here before." And she quickly sets up an office in one of the temple rooms and spends almost all of her time there. And she even befriends a cobra and feeds the cobra daily, and just has this cobra friend that just hangs out with her, which no one can make any sense of. Lots of rumors swirled around whether this woman was sane, but because her contributions to Egyptology were so pronounced and so useful, that she was very highly regarded. But of all of her accomplishments, of all of the things that she did, the thing that she is most known for is when she was able, as soon as she got to the temple of Seti I, identify exactly where the garden was. For Seti, she'd been having dreams of this garden her whole life. And so she very quickly said, if you dig here, you're going to find this garden. And sure enough, they dug down, and there was the garden. And in fact, she described the layout of the garden, what trees were where, what types of trees were there, and it was all confirmed once they dug it up. She was also instrumental in identifying where to dig on the north side of the temple, where she said there was a tunnel that ran underneath, a secret tunnel. And sure enough, they dug down, there was the tunnel. That was something that they had never seen before. Only she knew about it, and there was no way she would have known about it without prior knowledge. In addition, she also pointed researchers to search in a specific area, in an area known as the Valley of the Kings, for a tomb, a long-forgotten tomb. And sure enough, almost exactly where she described, there was in fact a tomb that had never been discovered before. As much as other Egyptologists did not want to accept Seti's claims that she had been reincarnated, and that's why she has all this knowledge, they wanted, frankly, it to be just the ramblings of a crazy person and it to just be some elaborate hoax. But they couldn't deny the fact that she had intimate knowledge of certainly everything that ever happened at the temple of Seti I in the time frame that she claimed to have been living there, 3,000 years prior. Fascinatingly, right before she died, when she was 81, she said there was a secret underneath the temple of Seti I. There was a secret chamber. There was a secret within that secret chamber. But no one's ever gone down there. No one knows where to begin to look. And so without Seti guiding them, it may be one of those things that we'll never know. So without any sort of rational explanation for how she would have had all this knowledge or understanding of an ancient culture, it leaves skeptics wondering, I mean, is this potentially a real case of reincarnation, or is there a better explanation? And I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. So that's going to do it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this, please like the video and hit subscribe. I'm going to be posting multiple times a week stories about strange, mysterious, dark stuff. If that's the kind of thing you like, then I'm the channel for you, I hope. Also, please follow me on TikTok. My handle is also Mr. Ballin. And then on Instagram, it's JohnBallin416. That's going to do it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. See ya.
Deal 'em.
Whatever stereotype you're gonna try to put on me about having HIV isn't gonna fit. That's for sure.
Hey, Vsauce. Michael here. When something becomes part of the past, can it ever truly be experienced again? Obviously, my beard...
Someone discovered that by opening the file using a text editor, an appended string of readable text could be found. The string contained a cipher that, once deciphered, formed a link to yet another image. At first, this appeared to be a dead end, but using an application known as OutGuess, users were able to extract hidden information embedded within the first image. The extracted information led to a subreddit, which in turn contained information about the book. The book, along with a code, could then be used to uncover a phone number that, when called, played this pre-recorded message.
Very good. You have done well. There are 3 prime numbers associated with the original final.jpg image. 3301 is one of them. You will have to find the other 2. Multiply all 3 of these numbers together and add a .com on the end to find the next step. Good luck. Goodbye.
By the following day, the initial image had been reposted all over the internet. A growing community of armchair detectives sought to unravel this elaborate puzzle, but no one was quite sure what to make of it. What was the puzzle for? Who was behind it? What happens when you reach the end? Some naturally dismissed it as an elaborate joke, while others perceived its complexity as evidence against it being the work of a mere troll. Before long, rumors began to circulate that this could be the work of some secret society or intelligence agency, with the intent of recruiting individuals proficient in cryptography, steganography, and other related fields.
One fight, one cause, thousands of hours of gameplay, hundreds of skills, and unlimited possibilities. You want real warriors? You've got it. Someone's gonna get hurt. Build the best teams and fight together. Raid Shadow Legends.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and install Honey. Wait, Mom, before you check out, do you have Honey installed?
What's Honey?
Oh, no. It's a free browser add-on that automatically...
The case we're going to look at today is so messed up that British courts have banned all media outlets from ever revealing the true names of the people involved. As such, the names you're going to hear today have all been made up. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload.
Just out of college, and despite having a degree, it was almost impossible for me to get a job. Day after day, week after week, I sent out my resume to every game developer and computer company in the country, and a few in Europe and Asia. 6 months into this, my money was running very low. This was when I was forced to face the facts. I needed a job immediately, and it didn't matter where and for how much. Just in time, I found a job listing for a video game store at the mall. You know the one I mean, and the terrible stories you hear about them are almost always true. Because of my background in games, I was given an interview immediately and hired soon after. My first shift was the following morning. Other than a few hiccups along the way, it kept my head above water until I got on with Dell 2 years later. The meat of the facts began just before my second year was about to start. Because of the high turnover, I was made an assistant manager by month 9. None of my shifts were evenings, so I was tasked with keeping the younger employees in line. A job I never really took seriously since I was only a few years older than they were. I didn't care how they acted, as long as they did their job. Around this time, a girl was hired that could have been my undoing. The second I saw her, I knew she would be a problem. However, it wasn't just her that was the source of trouble. Her super jealous boyfriend became a thorn in the side of every guy that worked with her, and sometimes just spoke to her. A shift of hers didn't go by without him showing up to check on her. Some nights, he would do no more than sit on a bench outside the store and watch her work. But anytime she would get too close to a guy for his liking, he'd approach them and physically intimidate the guy she was talking to. She never said a thing when this happened. I actually think she kind of liked it, but it would be what would push her away from him in the end. She'd worked at the store for a couple of weeks before someone showed her the hallways that ran along the back of every place. She took advantage of the fact he wasn't aware of them, and this turned out to be a big mistake. If any person reading this doesn't know what I'm talking about, pay attention. You're about to learn something. I'm not sure how common this is, but some indoor malls, those built in the old way where each store inhabited an area that leased from the mall owner, there are a network of paths or halls that run behind each business. They're used mainly by the employees. The system allows them to enter and leave their jobs without being seen by the customers. Although I'm pretty sure their intended purpose was to give janitorial staff an uncluttered pathway to maintain the spaces. That being said, in all my time at that job, I only saw a member of the cleaning staff a handful of times. Most of those times, they were sneaking a cigarette rather than working. Luckily, we could still smoke inside the building back then. No one said anything to the office if they caught you, probably because they were doing the same thing on their breaks. If we are all on the same page now, I'll get to the real story. Like I said, his jealousy, no matter how it turned her on, was at the same time pushing her away. On her breaks, she'd often sneak out the back and disappear for a while. Where she went, I had no idea or really cared. The boyfriend took forever to catch on, but when he did, he was super angry. She continued this routine for a few months, and just one day, she never came back to the store. I didn't attach any importance to this. It was during the holidays and work was a nightmare. It wasn't uncommon for employees to go on break after an especially hectic rush and not return. The turnover was simply that bad. Things got a bit more interesting about 4 or 5 days later. The police showed up and had some questions about her disappearance. I was like, disappearance? What's going on here? They then informed me that she had been reported missing the day after she bailed on work by her parents. She had never made it home, and they thought we may know something. The crazy thing was that when they visited her boyfriend's place to see if she was there, in addition to him not being there, after some digging, they learned that nobody had seen either of them for about a week. I was quick to make it clear that I didn't know anything. I had just assumed she got sick of the place and bailed. I guess they were happy with that. Never heard from them again. Time passed and the situation around her almost faded completely from my mind, until something really big in February happened and brought it back into crystal clarity. Some workmen were renovating one of the store's spaces for an incoming client, and once they had completed emptying the space of what the previous renters had left behind, they began the undertaking of finding the source of a terrible smell. Initially, it had been inferred that the smell was emanating from some old food products left behind in the space. But even after the clearing, the stink remained. The next theory was that an animal like a rat had died in the wall. It had happened before. So, before they went to the extreme of busting holes in the walls to find the source of the smell, they went next door to the adjoining space that was also empty and had been for some time. They spent close to an hour sifting through tons of old displays and leftover building materials. It turned out that the mall had been using this space for years as storage and the place was a mess. The two guys tasked with doing this were about to say forget it, when one of them stumbled upon the source of the stink, and it definitely wasn't a rat. Someone had taken a large piece of plywood and put it over a tiny little closet, thus making it invisible. The guy had caught on that the smell grew worse as he got closer to this board, so he pushed aside the heavy display rack holding the board against the wall, and as soon as he pulled back the board, he found what was causing it. The semi-mummified body of what looked like a female was lying on the floor facing the wall. It appeared the arid and dry Arizona heat had preserved the corpse and suppressed decomposition. This had to have been why it wasn't stinking up the entire mall and managed to remain hidden for so long. Naturally, the mall was alive with talk of who the body could possibly belong to. Numbers of people had just stopped coming to work one day or skipped out during their lunch. We'd gone through at least 15 people in the last year ourselves. When the answer came, no one could have guessed who it was. Early one morning, I was awakened by my manager with the news that Becky Morrison was the person they found in the empty store. My only answer was, who? He reminded me that she was the girl with the crazy, jealous boyfriend that had disappeared just before Christmas. I hung up and went back to sleep. When I returned from my shift that night, it was the only thing anyone could talk about. The next question asked was, who did it? The overall favorite was the crazy boyfriend. Everyone knew by now that he had disappeared just after her, and considering his body wasn't found alongside hers, it was a fair assumption. He was most definitely nuts. It made sense. The story took a whole new angle just a couple of weeks after she was identified. An article was published in the paper discussing a possible new motive behind this. The police had recently received information that Becky had been messing around with a fellow mall employee during her breaks. They were meeting in the unoccupied store her body had been discovered in and fooling around. After following some leads, they were able to identify the employee. He was a 22-year-old guy working in the Hallmark store, but no name was given. He told the officers that he and Becky were supposed to hook up the day she disappeared, but he got holed up by the time he'd reached the empty space and she was gone. He figured she couldn't wait and returned to work. It was only a few days later, when the cops showed up at the mall to ask questions, that he heard she was missing. His mind went straight to the worst, and he was afraid he'd be blamed for it, so he said nothing. Then, when the news reached him that the boyfriend was also missing, it was too late. He figured if the boyfriend was hiding out, waiting for his chance to get him, it was best for him to say nothing, just on the off chance he didn't know for sure who the guy was. It all boiled down to him being afraid, and with what I knew, I could understand. What nobody knew, and still probably doesn't, is that her and I had a thing for a short while too. It wasn't long, but once is all it takes. I was the person who told her about the back hallways, after all. We slipped out there a few times to mess around. Fortunately, we never got busted. When she moved on to the next guy, I wasn't hurt. I knew she had a boyfriend anyway. Now you know why I had to act as if though I didn't care about her. We figured it was the safest thing for the both of us. Turns out we were right. I was overjoyed no one knew about us. If the dude was crazy enough to strangle her for cheating, which seemed to be the reason, he would no doubt come after the dude she was with. I felt sorry for the Hallmark guy. It wouldn't take much mental math to figure out who he was, if we didn't already know, and since they still haven't found him to this day, the fear of her boyfriend popping up out of nowhere and putting some holes in him must have been real strong. I know I was looking over my shoulder for several years after. The police have this theory that he may have ended his life not long after. There hadn't been any activity on his bank account or card for years, and I still wasn't taking any chances. 9 years later, a week doesn't go by that I don't think about her. An outsider may have seen her as an easy girl, but I still don't think of her that way. It struck me that she was just looking for a guy that would treat her well and commit to her for the long term without being psychotic about it. She was genuinely a good person, and certainly didn't deserve the end she had, but then again, I can't think of very many that do. I'm not sure if this is the creepiest or the most disgusting thing to ever happen to me, but here it is. I'm a 17-year-old female, and this happened about 3 months ago. Me and my friends always like to go to McDonald's after we had a good yoga session. You could call us regulars. We probably did yoga together 2 or 3 times a week, and it wasn't a class or anything. It was just me and 3 of my friends. We had another friend, Olivia, who occasionally joined us, but she was kind of flaky. If she didn't feel like doing yoga that day, we just went ahead and did it without her. We had been in this routine for a couple of weeks at this point, and we always looked forward to getting some nice junk food. There was something about McDonald's that was like the guilty pleasure of my entire existence. I normally didn't get it otherwise, but I really look forward to the couple of occasions that me and my friends went there. But this one experience was horrible. I had been there enough that I started to recognize the people that worked there. I never had conversations with them, but I knew their faces well enough to spot when someone new was in the back working. That's exactly what happened this one Wednesday afternoon. I noticed this guy with really thin hair. He had a really creepy face, and I'm not sure how to describe it exactly. His eyes were humongous. They looked like the eyes of a bug. And then he had this really strange body language that always kind of freaked me out. It was like jumpy or something. If he was deep frying French fries, for example, he would stand perfectly still for a second, and then really quickly submerge them in one motion, and it would splash grease all over. This was very unusual, considering I had seen enough people put down fries that there was an easier way he could have done that. He didn't have to splash it like that. I was watching him one day, and we made eye contact. It was really unusual, too, because I was looking at him as my mom's credit card was processing to pay for my meal. He had his back turned toward me. I was trying to figure out if I knew who he was, and then he just spun around to look at me, and it was all in one motion. It was just really freaky. So I started noticing him more and more. He was always working whenever my friends and I got finished with our yoga. It didn't bother me too much. My friends also noticed how weird he was and told me about similar experiences. It wasn't creepy enough that we stopped going or anything, but it was certainly enough to notice. I remember the day in particular. It was a weekend because I didn't have school that day. Me and my friends had just finished a really good yoga session and we headed over to McDonald's. Anyway, my friends and I ordered our food and were waiting for a few minutes. It took a little bit longer than usual, which isn't really an issue because we're not impatient or anything. But here was the weird part. They weren't busy. We were basically the only people in there waiting for food, and I think they had one other person who had already ordered who was sitting down and already eating. I didn't see any cars in the drive-thru, and I just found the whole situation extremely bizarre. I'd noticed that the creepy guy was working, but I didn't see him for a very long time. He went behind a wall that I couldn't see him around, and I wasn't sure why he did this either. Life went on, and we got our food and sat down. I normally start by eating my fries and then have whatever my main meal is after that. Today it happens to be chicken nuggets. I got a 10-piece. As I was eating, I felt that creepy guy's watchful eyes looming over us. I felt really freaked out, and I convinced my friends to take our meal into the car to leave. As we left, I looked back to see him frowning at me. I didn't stop walking. Well, we got out there, and for a few minutes I felt like I was being paranoid and I overreacted. My friends thought so too, until I looked at my chicken nuggets. I looked inside of the box they were in, and they seemed to be covered in some kind of weird substance. I couldn't quite make it out, and I didn't know what to think. My immediate reaction was that they had put mayonnaise on it or something. Thankfully, I was smart enough to ask my friends before I took a bite. My one friend screamed, "That freak jizzed on your nuggets." The more I analyzed this strange substance on my chicken nuggets, the more convinced I became that it really was, in fact, that. That certainly explains why it had taken so long for us to get our food. I didn't quite understand how he was able to pull it off, though.